They weren't interested in us, but went for the most noise, and we got our canoe and made for the raft, and was all safe, and Jim was a free man, and we done it all by ourselves, and wasn't it bully, Auntie? Well, I never heard the likes of it in all my born days. So it was you little rapscallions, that's been making all this trouble, and turned everybody's wits clean inside out, and scared us almost to death. I've as good a notion as ever I had in my life to take it out of you this very minute. To think here I've been night after night, well, you just get well once, you young scamp, and I'll tan the old Harry out of both of you. But Tom, he was so proud and joyful, he just couldn't hold in, and his tongue just went it. She a-chipping in, spitting fire all along, and both of them going at it at once, like a cat convention, and she says, Well, you get all the enjoyment you can out of it now, but mind I tell you, if I catch you meddling with him again— Meddling with who? Tom says, dropping his smile and looking surprised. With who? Why, the runaway nigger, of course. Who do you reckon? Tom looks at me very grave and says, Tom, didn't you just tell me he was all right? Hasn't he got away? Him, says Aunt Sally, the runaway nigger? 'Deed he hasn't. They've got him back, safe and sound, and he's in that cabin again on bread and water, and loaded down with chains till he's claimed or sold. Tom rose up square in bed, with his eyes hot and his nostrils opening and shutting like gills, and sings out to me, They ain't no right to shut him up. Shove, and don't you lose a minute. Turn him loose. He ain't no slave. He's as free as any creature that walks this earth. What does the child mean? I mean every word I say, Aunt Sally, and if somebody don't go, I'll go. I've knowed him all his life, and so has Tom there. Old Miss Watson died 2 months ago, and she was ashamed she ever was going to sell him down the river, and said so, and she set him free in her will. Then what on earth did you want to set him free for, seeing he was already free? Well, that is a question, I must say, and just like women. Why, I wanted the adventure of it, and I'd have waded neck-deep in blood to— Goodness alive, Aunt Polly! If she weren't standing right there, just inside the door, looking as sweet and contented as an angel half full of pie, I wish I may never. Aunt Sally jumped for her, and most hugged the head off of her, and cried over her, and I found a good enough place for me under the bed, for it was getting pretty sultry for us, seemed to me. And I peeped out, and in a little while Tom's Aunt Polly shook herself loose and stood there looking across at Tom over her spectacles, kind of grinding him into the earth, you know, and then she says, Yes, you better turn your head away. I would if I was you, Tom. Oh, dearie me, says Aunt Sally. Is he changed so? Why, that ain't Tom, it's Sid. Tom's— Why, where is Tom? He was here a minute ago. You mean where's Huck Finn? That's what you mean. I reckon I ain't raised such a scamp as my Tom all these years not to know him when I see him. That would be a pretty howdy-do. Come out from under that bed, Huck Finn. So I done it, but not feeling brash. Aunt Sally, she was one of the mixed-uppest looking persons I ever see, except one, and that was Uncle Silas, when he come in and they told it all to him. It kind of made him drunk, as you may say, and he didn't know nothing at all the rest of the day, and preached a prayer-meeting sermon that night that give him a rattling reputation, because the oldest man in the world couldn't have understood it. So Tom's Aunt Polly, she told all about who I was and what, and I had to up and tell how I was in such a tight place that when Mrs. Phelps took me for Tom Sawyer, she chipped in and says, Oh, go on and call me Aunt Sally. I'm used to it now, and 'tain't no need to change. That when Aunt Sally took me for Tom Sawyer, I had to stand it. There warn't no other way, and I knowed he wouldn't mind, because it would be nuts for him being a mystery, and he'd make an adventure out of it and be perfectly satisfied. And so it turned out, and he let on to be Sid, and made things as soft as he could for me. And his Aunt Polly, she said Tom was right about old Miss Watson setting Jim free in her will, and so sure enough Tom Sawyer had gone and took all that trouble and bother to set a free nigger free. And I couldn't ever understand before, until that minute and that talk, how he could help a body set a nigger free with his bringing up. Well, Aunt Polly, she said that when Aunt Sally wrote to her that Tom and Sid had come all right and safe, she says to herself, "Look at that now. I might have expected it, letting him go off that way without anybody to watch him. So now I got to go and traipse all the way down the river 1,100 mile and find out what that creature's up to this time, as long as I couldn't seem to get any answer out of you about it." "Why, I never heard nothing from you," says Aunt Sally. "Well, I wonder. Why, I wrote you twice to ask you what you could mean by Sid being here." "Well, I never got 'em, sis." Aunt Polly, she turns around slow and severe and says, "You, Tom!" "Well, what?" he says, kind of pettish. "Don't you what me, you impudent thing. Hand out them letters." "What letters?" "Them letters. I'll be bound if I have to take a hold of you out." "They're in the trunk. There now. And they're just the same as they was when I got them out of the office. I hain't looked into 'em. I hain't touched 'em. But I know they'd make trouble, and I thought if you warn't in no hurry, I'd—" "Well, you do need skinning. There ain't no mistake about it. And I wrote another one to tell you I was coming, and I s'pose he—" "No, it come yesterday. I hain't read it yet, but it's all right. I've got that one." I wanted to offer to bet $2 she hadn't, but I reckon maybe it was just as safe not to.
File 43.
Chapter the Last. The first time I catched Tom private, I asked him what was his idea time of the evasion. What it was he'd planned to do if the evasion worked all right and he managed to set a nigger free that was already free before. And he said what he had planned in his head from the start, if we got Jim out all safe, was for us to run him down the river on the raft and have adventures plumb to the mouth of the river, and then tell him about his being free and take him back up home on a steamboat in style, and pay for his lost time and write word ahead and get out all the niggers around and have them waltz him into town with a torchlight procession and a brass band. And then he would be a hero, and so would we. But I reckoned it was about as well the way it was. We had Jim out of the chains in no time, and when Aunt Polly and Uncle Silas and Aunt Sally found out how good he helped the doctor nurse Tom, they made a heap of fuss over him and fixed him up prime and give him all he wanted to eat and a good time and nothing to do. And we had him up to the sick room and had a high talk, and Tom give Jim $40 for being prisoner for us so patient and doing it up so good. And Jim was pleased most to death and busted out and says, "Dah now, Huck, what I tell you? What I tell you up dah on Jackson Island? I told you I got a hairy breast, and what's the sign on it? And I told you I been rich once and going to be rich again. And it's come true, and here she is. Dah now, don't talk to me. Signs is signs, mind I tell you. And I know just as well that I is gwine to be rich again as I is standing here this minute." And then Tom, he talked along and says, "Let's all three slide out of here one of these nights and get an outfit, and go for howling adventures amongst the Injuns over in the territory for a couple of weeks or two." And I says, "All right, that suits me, but I ain't got no money for to buy the outfit. And I reckon I couldn't get none from home because it's likely Pap's been back before now and got it all away from Judge Thatcher and drunk it up." "No, he ain't," Tom says. "It's all there yet, $6,000 or more, and your Pap ain't ever been back since. Hadn't when I come, anyhow." Jim says, kind of solemn, "He ain't a-comin' back no more, Huck." I says, "Why, Jim?" "Never mind why, Huck, but he ain't comin' back no more." But I kept at him, so at last he says, "Don't you 'member the house that was floating down the river, and they was a man in there kivered up, and I went in and unkivered him and didn't let you come in? Well, then you can get your money when you wants it, 'cause that was him." Tom's most well now and got his bullet around his neck on a watch guard for a watch, and is always seeing what time it is, and so there ain't nothing more to write about. And I am rotten glad of it, because if I'd a knowed what a trouble it was to make a book, I wouldn't have tackled it, and ain't a-going to no more. But I reckon I got a light out for the territory ahead of the rest, because Aunt Sally, she's going to adopt me and civilize me, and I can't stand it. I've been there before. The end.